it's amazing to me that, songwriting is done pretty much in solitude.
At my age, when I get up in the morning, just the thought of being able to sit down later on in the
July 26th, 2024. A plane carrying gospel music legends plummets from the sky in rural Wyoming. 7 souls aboard. None survive. Hours earlier, they had posted a cheerful video on Instagram, smiling, laughing, excited about joining Bill Gaither's Alaska cruise. That video would be their last. For months afterward, Bill Gaither, the 88-year-old titan of gospel music, said nothing, absolute silence. And when he finally broke that silence, what he revealed shocked even his most devoted fans. But here's what you don't know. This tragedy is just one piece of a much larger story. A story about an empire built on faith, a man who's been both celebrated as a saint and attacked as a sellout, and secrets that have remained hidden for decades. Today, we're uncovering the complete truth about Bill Gaither, the controversies, the criticism, the unimaginable loss, and what his response reveals about him. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never see him the same way again. Stay with me. This gets deep. Picture this. It's a beautiful summer day in Nebraska City. Nebraska. The weather is perfect. The Nellon family, Kelly Nellon Clark, her husband Jason Clark, and their daughter Amber Nellon Kistler are standing outside a small plane, recording a video for their Instagram followers. They're genuinely excited, almost giddy with anticipation. In just a few days, they'll be performing on Bill Gaither's prestigious Alaska cruise, alongside gospel music's biggest names. Kelly jokes with the camera, her eyes bright with joy. Amber smiles, that radiant smile that audiences loved. Jason waves, looking relaxed and happy. They talk about grabbing something to eat before their next flight to Montana. Just a normal family moment, the kind we all share on social media without thinking twice. They have absolutely no idea they have only hours to live. The Pilatus PC-12 aircraft carried 7 people total when it went down in Campbell County, Wyoming. The crash was catastrophic. The impact was so severe that a massive fire erupted at the crash site, and firefighters had to battle through the entire night to bring it under control. The location was incredibly remote, so isolated that investigators couldn't even reach the wreckage immediately. They had to wait, plan their approach, figure out how to access an area that was essentially in the middle of nowhere. And all the while, the gospel music community was reeling, trying to process what had happened, waiting for answers that seemed impossibly slow in coming. Kelly Nellon Clark wasn't just another gospel singer. She was gospel music royalty. The Nellons had been inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 2016. They had an astounding 20 songs reach the top 5 on gospel charts. They earned 10 Dove Awards and were nominated for 35 total. Their latest Dove Award had come just 3 years before the crash, in 2021. Jason had become a member of the group in 1994, and Amber had joined in 2002, continuing the multi-generational tradition that had defined the Nellons from the beginning. These weren't just talented musicians. They were beloved figures who had touched countless lives with their music. But here's the part that makes this tragedy even more gut-wrenching. Kelly's youngest daughter, Autumn Nellon Streetman, and her husband Jamie weren't on that plane. They had traveled separately to Seattle, taking a different route. That decision saved their lives. Now imagine this. Really put yourself in this moment. You arrive in Seattle, excited about an upcoming cruise, ready to perform with your family. You're probably checking into your hotel, maybe texting your mom to see when she'll arrive. And then someone from the Gaither organization finds you, and they have to tell you that your mother, your father, and your sister are gone. Not hurt, not injured, gone. Killed. Your entire family wiped out in an instant. The Gospel Music Association released a statement expressing profound sorrow. Jackie Patillo, president of the Gospel Music Association, sent deepest condolences and prayers to Autumn and the entire Nellon family. The governor of Georgia also shared a message asking everyone to pray for those lost. Gospel artists from across the country gathered at the hotel in Seattle where Autumn and Jamie had arrived. They surrounded the grieving couple with prayers and songs and support, doing the only thing they knew how to do in the face of unspeakable tragedy. They sang. They prayed. They wept together. The Gaither management team revealed that Autumn and Jamie had eventually returned home to be with Kelly's brother, Todd Nellon, and his wife Rhonda, as they began the painful, impossible process of facing what lay ahead. Planning funerals for 3 people at once, sorting through belongings, trying to answer the question that has no answer. Why? And through all of this, Bill Gaither had yet to comment on what had happened. Not a word. Not a statement. Nothing. For weeks, then months, he remained silent. And people started to wonder. Some were patient, understanding that grief takes different forms, and that Bill perhaps needed time to process his own feelings. Others were less charitable, questioning why the man who had organized the cruise, who had invited the Nellons to perform, who had known this family for decades, wasn't saying anything publicly. The speculation grew. The questions multiplied, and the longer the silence stretched, the more significant people expected his statement to be when it finally came. Several months after the tragic plane crash, Bill Gaither finally released a touching video tribute about the Nellons. The video was carefully crafted, filled with photographs and video clips spanning decades. In it, Bill reminisced about special moments with the Nellons over the years, his voice warm with affection and heavy with loss. He recalled memories from when Kelly's father, Rex Nellon, first appeared on a Gaither stage back in the early days. He talked about watching little Amber grow up, seeing her transform from a child tagging along with her family to a confident performer in her own right. He shared stories about inside jokes, about rehearsals that went long, about moments of spontaneous worship that happened backstage. He talked about their final days together, the last time he saw them, the last conversations they had. And you could hear in his voice that he was doing what he always did, trying to find meaning in tragedy, trying to point people toward hope, even when hope seemed impossible. The week Bill finally broke his silence was also significant for another reason. It was the first time Autumn Nellon Streetman joined the Gaithers for a new taping since the crash. Can you imagine the courage that took walking into a recording studio filled with gospel music's biggest names, knowing that your mother and father and sister should be there with you? Seeing empty spaces where they used to stand. Being there without her family must have been almost unbearably painful, but it marked a significant step forward for Autumn. It was a statement that life, somehow, had to continue. As many people expected, Bill Gaither described the tragedy as part of God's plan. He spoke about divine sovereignty, about trusting God even when we don't understand, about the promise that all things work together for good for those who love God. For many fans, this was exactly what they needed to hear. It provided a framework for processing the tragedy, a way to maintain faith in the face of senseless loss. It affirmed that even when terrible things happen, God hasn't lost control, hasn't abandoned us, hasn't made a mistake. But for others, Bill's words felt inadequate, even offensive. How could a loving God plan for 3 talented, faithful people who had dedicated their lives to ministry to die in a burning plane crash? How was that part of any plan worth believing in? The theological debate that erupted revealed a fundamental divide in how Christians process tragedy, and Bill Gaither found himself right in the middle of it. But here's what this moment really revealed about Bill Gaither. He has spent his entire career serving as more than just a musician. He's become a theological voice for millions of people. When he speaks, people listen. When he interprets tragedy through the lens of faith, that interpretation shapes how countless Christians understand their own suffering. That kind of influence comes with enormous responsibility and enormous criticism, because no matter what he said about the Nellon tragedy, someone was going to be upset. Say too much about God's plan, and you sound callous. Say too little, and you sound like you've lost your faith. Bill chose his words carefully, but he couldn't make everyone happy. Which brings us to something crucial you need to understand about Bill Gaither. He's not just another gospel singer. At 88 years old, he's one of the rare figures in gospel music who has built a true empire. And that empire has made him both celebrated and controversial for decades. Let me ask you something. When does ministry become business? When does sharing the gospel turn into selling the gospel? These aren't easy questions, and they've followed Bill Gaither throughout his career. Bill Gaither's homecoming concerts started incredibly small. Church gatherings where quartets would sing and people would drop donations into a bucket. Nobody was getting rich. It was pure ministry. Then, something remarkable happened. The homecoming concept exploded. Suddenly, these weren't concerts anymore. They were massive productions in arenas holding thousands of people. Professional lighting, giant video screens, multiple camera crews, sound engineers, and with all of that came real ticket prices. $50, $75, sometimes $100 per person. The lobbies transformed into marketplaces. Tables loaded with CDs, mugs, T-shirts, songbooks, everything branded, everything priced. Critics, especially from smaller churches, started arguing loudly that gospel music had turned into an expensive spectacle. They remembered when quartets sang for love offerings. They worried families with tight budgets were being priced out. One newsletter even called it the Gaither money machine. Bill Gaither didn't back down. He responded openly, explaining the financial realities. Renting a 15,000-seat arena costs serious money. Union workers must be paid. Insurance is astronomical. Advanced ticket sales prevented crippling debt. But here's what critics often missed. Significant portions of the profits funded new recordings for emerging artists, music scholarships, mission work, and preserving gospel music history. Bill argued that sound business practices enabled ministry to happen on a larger scale. Over time, the tension softened. The tours kept their pricing but added cheaper upper-level seats and group discounts for churches. And here's the thing. Attendance remains incredibly strong. Arenas still fill up. What does that tell us? For most fans, the trade-off makes sense. Better sound, comfortable seats, professional production. The message still matters more than the money. But if you thought the commercialization controversy was divisive, what happened in Phoenix in 2002 would make those debates look tame. Bill and Gloria Gaither organized a homecoming gathering where gospel singers came together to share stories and songs. One guest was Marcia Stevens, famous for writing a beloved worship song in the 1,970 seconds. But years after her initial success, Marcia publicly came out as gay and began leading worship in churches that affirmed same-sex relationships. When photos from the Phoenix event circulated in conservative newsletters, showing Bill and Gloria smiling next to Marcia and her partner, the reaction was explosive. Christian magazines were flooded with angry letters. Pastors urged congregations to boycott Gaither videos. Some accused Bill of being soft on sin, of compromising biblical truth. Bill Gaither's response was remarkably calm. He explained that the homecoming table was meant to show Christian love to everyone. Inviting someone to sing didn't mean endorsing every aspect of their life. He reminded critics that Jesus often shared meals with people whose choices upset religious leaders. Then, Bill said something crucial. He reaffirmed his traditional view of marriage clearly and unambiguously, but in the same breath, emphasized treating all guests with kindness and respect. He seemed to be arguing you can hold firm theological convictions while still showing radical hospitality. Most fans accepted his explanation after seeing his clear statement of beliefs. DVD sales dipped briefly, but soon bounced back. However, a small vocal group remained furious. Some former fans never bought another Gaither product. The wounds from this controversy still haven't fully healed in some circles. This episode revealed how fast misunderstandings spread and demonstrated Bill's consistent commitment to his core beliefs. Open doors, warm hearts, and songs about grace, even when people disagree. These controversies, the commercialization debates, the theological tensions, they all matter because they show who Bill Gaither really is. He's someone who has built something unprecedented. The Gaither Music Company isn't just a record label. It handles concert bookings nationwide, produces television shows that air globally, manages an enormous catalog of copyrights, runs retail operations, and operates professional recording studios. Part of the company is even an animation studio led by Bill's son, creating content to reach young generations. This is a multi-million-dollar operation with real infrastructure and international reach. Most gospel artists struggle financially, driving beat-up vans and working second jobs. Bill Gaither built something completely different, and this creates a tension. Is he a visionary who gave gospel music the resources to reach millions? Or a businessman who turned worship into a product? The honest answer might be both, and that's uncomfortable. We like clean categories. But Bill built a business empire while also preserving gospel music history, giving platforms to countless artists, writing songs that comforted millions, and funding scholarships and mission work. So let's come back to where we started. That plane crash, the Nellon family, Bill's months of silence, his eventual tribute, his controversial statement about God's plan. Now you understand the full context. Bill Gaither isn't just a gospel singer who lost friends. He's an 88-year-old man who built an unprecedented empire, faced constant criticism, navigated theological controversies, maintained his values while holding traditional beliefs, and watched friends die while trying to make sense of it through faith. Is he perfect? No. Has he made everyone happy? Impossible. Has he made decisions that warrant criticism? Probably. But has he also preserved gospel music history? Yes. Given countless artists platforms? Yes. Written songs that comforted millions? Absolutely. Built something that will outlast him? Without question. Bill Gaither's story isn't simple. It's complicated, messy, human. Just like faith itself. He's been called a saint and a sellout, often by the same people. He built an empire while preaching humility. He enforced ticket prices while funding scholarships. He invited controversial guests while maintaining traditional values. These contradictions don't necessarily mean he's a hypocrite. They might just mean he's human. So what's the truth about Bill Gaither? Maybe it's this. He's a man who took his gifts seriously, built something remarkable, made difficult choices, and kept singing about grace even when critics demanded judgment. At 88, he's still here, still creating, still controversial, still singing. And when he finally broke his silence about the Nellon tragedy, he did what he's always done, tried to point people toward God even in the darkest moments. The Nellon tragedy reminded everyone that life is fragile, that even faithful people die in terrible ways. That tragedy doesn't discriminate. Bill's response, whatever you think of it, was consistent with who he's always been. The controversies that have followed him for decades reflect larger tensions in American Christianity about faith and money, ministry and business, worship and entertainment. His position has been remarkably consistent. Professionalism isn't contrary to ministry, but can enable it. Bill Gaither's story isn't simple, and we do it a disservice when we try to make it simple. It's complicated, messy, fully human, just like faith itself, just like the church itself, just like each of us. He's been called a saint by people who love him and a sellout by people who don't, often by the same people depending on what he did that day. He's built an empire while preaching humility. He's enforced ticket prices while funding scholarships. He's invited controversial guests while maintaining traditional values. He's made millions while talking about laying up treasures in heaven. These contradictions don't necessarily mean he's a hypocrite. They might just mean he's human. So what's the truth about Bill Gaither? After everything we've discussed, after all the controversies and tragedies and criticisms and achievements, What's the final verdict? Maybe it's this. He's a man who took his gifts seriously, who built something remarkable with those gifts, who made difficult choices that not everyone agreed with, and who kept singing about grace even when critics demanded judgment. He found a way to merge business and ministry in a way that had never been done before in gospel music. He survived controversies that would have ended other ministries. He kept creating even when the criticism was intense. He kept believing even when tragedy struck. At 88 years old, he's still here, still creating new content, still sparking controversy, still singing. And that, when you really think about it, might be the most surprising part of this entire story. The Nellons tragedy reminded everyone in gospel music that life is fragile, that even faithful people die in terrible ways, that tragedy doesn't discriminate based on how many awards you've won or how many lives you've touched with your music. Bill's response to that tragedy, whatever you think of it, was consistent with who he's always been. A man trying to point people toward God, even in the darkest moments. The commercialization controversy that's followed him for decades reflects a larger tension in American Christianity about the relationship between faith and money, between ministry and business, between worship and entertainment. Bill's position in that debate, whatever you think of it, has been remarkably consistent. Professionalism and business practices aren't contrary to ministry, but can actually enable it. The Phoenix controversy about Marsha Stevens reflected the church's ongoing struggle with how to love people while disagreeing with them. How,